We've got 16. I think we've got quorum, so we can go ahead and get started. As I mentioned to everyone, there is a chat window on the right-hand side of the screen that you can bring up under the More command. So feel free to put comments or questions there, or to interrupt at any point too. There is a hand-raising feature. Hujun, you found that last time. Where is the raise your hand? You're on.
It's in the participant window. Right. Below that, there's mute me and raise hand. So if I raise hand, click on that, you can see a hand shape right next to my name.
Got it.
So if you, any time during the lecture, if you see that hand, you can address that person and tell that person to speak up.
And it goes to the top of the list, I see. So, all right. So I brought up on my right-hand side, I've got participants and I've got group chat. So I'll try to keep an eye on that. But as you did last week, look out for each other. And if somebody's raised a hand and I miss it, let me know. Let me go ahead and share my screen and bring up the lecture slides. We have a little bit different order of things today to accommodate our guest speaker. Let me go to presentation mode. Okay, is everybody seeing the title screen?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, cool, great. So the first thing is I've switched the order of some classes because I think this topic is probably more timely for where we are right now. And typically this is done as the second to last lecture on the last unit of people and staffing, but I thought we would do it tonight on IT leadership and lessons from crisis response. And I've got some new material to include on that. And Martha Heller, she can't join us until 6 o'clock. So I thought we'd do two short things before then, and then look for her to join us at 6. And then we can take our usual break after she's done. She's got a presentation, not a very long presentation. And then there's actually, I think the last time I looked, there were 14 questions on the question list. I don't think she will get to all of them, but she certainly was excited about seeing all the questions. So we'll try to maximize the Q&A time. And then the typical lecture and question and answers. And then a brief review, and this is one of the handouts. It's in Slack, and it's also in Canvas under handouts, is the a project finance template. So for planning a project budget, which is something you'd be doing as part of your team projects, I thought it might be useful to briefly take a look at that and make just a couple of points about it, but then you're free, of course, to use that template. Talk about some next assignments and some announcements and changes that we want to make as a result of the new reality, and then next steps. And if we it may not be relevant to even say team time at the end, because I think you're scheduling team time when you feel the need for it online. But if you want to take some time at 8 o'clock, we certainly can do that. Any questions on the agenda before I start? Okay. All right, so the mid-course survey, first of all, we got to put the survey in context, because the survey happened before this crisis impacted our work and lives. And so to a large degree, it represents the past, but there are some issues that were raised in the survey that the crisis, I think, makes worse. And so we need to talk about that, and we need to create some relief as a result. So at the next steps at the end, I'm going to be talking about some specific things that will change for that. I got a brief half-page report from CRLT. I've been working with Erping Zhu for 3 years, so she's familiar with the classes, and she administers the survey and then gives me her observation. These are her 2 key observations that she made. More clarity on assignments, and then the too many small assignments, not enough in-class time for teamwork, and I think, as you'll see on the next slide, overall workload. And of course, these in particular, the second one is exacerbated by the crisis. On the 3 slider bar questions, so in terms of the pace of the class, depth of content, the challenge presented, pretty much in the middle, although the challenge presented is nudging up there to at 58 out of 100 points on that sliding scale. These are with 19 respondents on this part of the survey. And so I think that's reflective of the workload and its connection with the challenge. And of course, this leads right into the top things to change. So on the verbatim responses, what I do is I do a hash tally on all of the comments in the verbatims. Adjusting the workload in some fashion was mentioned by 22% of the class, and clarifying assignments by 22%. Now, those are minority, but it's 3 people, I think. And so I view 3 as a trend. 1 is an anomaly, 2 is I don't know, and 3 I start to view as a trend. So because I can draw a line through 3 dots. So I take them seriously when they're 3 or more. Of course, I read all of the responses as well. And we'll talk about changes in a second about that. More about some things to stay the same. So in addition to the slider bar questions previously, guest speakers overwhelmingly, 53% of the class felt that the guest speakers were important to keep doing. Activities and field trips were rated pretty highly. And then a few comments on the diverse class content and class structure or something to keep the same. Big thank you to everybody for taking the time to do the survey, for being candid on the survey, writing suggestions and comments, which have impact on not only on the rest of the class, but certainly on next year's class as well. I think I mentioned to you early on, I view you as my customer base, the class as a product, and it needs to go through different releases with improvements based on what the customers are telling us. So that's what's happening there. And 18 of you completed the survey. 30 bonus points have already been awarded in Canvas, so you'll see those on the gradebook page. Okay. Let's see, how are we doing on time? We're okay, good. So we're going to change, actually we're going to change a few things about this, about the 3x3 reading summaries. They're now becoming, some have called them 1x1 summaries or 1-page summaries, but it's the next level of practicing succinct summaries, particularly as we're presenting things to executives, which is coming up soon. So this is version 2 of the reading summaries approach. It's the 1-page summary. It builds on what we've been doing in the 3x3 readings, taking it a step further. What is it? All the readings for a week are going to be summarized with 2 slides. So a 1-sentence summary for each reading, and then a, whoops, I didn't mean to hit my mouse to go up like that. 1-sentence summary for each reading. And its reference, and then 1 slide of 3 critical questions that we can discuss. Otherwise, all the other format requirements stay the same as in the 3x3. There is a rubric for this that is, I believe it's linked from the 3x3 readings critiques, but I will check that and let me know if you have difficulty finding it. That will be on an elective basis, and we'll talk more about that coming up. Hoo-Jun, you had a question.
Yeah, Professor. So that version 2 of the 3x3 summary does not affect the assignments, right? This only affects the in-class presentations.
Correct.
Okay, so for the individual assignments for every month, we stick to the original format.
Right.
Okay.
Subject to the changes that are coming up, but yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So before, any other questions before I plunge into the, I'm going to do the first one-page summary to give you an example of what that looks like. Okay, let's do it. So being geek, we had 3 chapters. I'm going to deal with them each separately instead of pulling a thread out of the 3. You have a choice of doing it either way. The work of leadership article, the Dark Factory article we read, and then there was a brief video by William Ury, who is probably one of the foremost writers, researchers on negotiations out of Harvard. These are the 6 headlines from the 6 pieces of the reading. Let me just put that side window out of the way. On the first one, you are the business, and the one consistent metric of business is measured by growth. This is Lopp in Being Geek in that first chapter. And the interesting thing he says is this is not equivalent to money. So growth in salary or money benefits, it's growth in your career, growth in you as an individual that you should look at. We'll come back to that in the discussion questions. Managers tend to be either organic or mechanic. The one organic being more oriented to the feel and sensing, and the mechanic being more structured. So one being more people oriented, the other being more process oriented, and then of course Lopp says there's a continuum of that as those different sides are exhibited by managers. But it's useful to understand what type of person your manager is and what they're expecting in terms of information. Lopp considered one-on-one meetings a critical building block. He would discuss these 3 things. What are you worried about? Here's what I'm worried about, and let's discuss. So that's the 3 summary headlines, if you will, from the 3 Lopp chapters. On the Heffitz and Laurie chapter, they talk a lot about adaptive change, which is the sort of change that happens when organizations are forced to adjust in a radically altered environment. Now, we can consider the COVID-19 virus as something that's radically changing the way organizations are run. And that was the conference call I was on this afternoon about talking, in fact, about that impact. In the Dark Factory article, a very readable and engaging article, I think, that was in the New Yorker a few years ago. This quote from the middle of the article, which of course gave the article its title, "The future is the dark factory. You don't need workers. You turn off the lights." And he goes on to say the only reason you turn on the lights is if you have visitors from America coming to the factory. And then Ury has this wonderful quote and example in this short video, that the greatest power we have as a negotiator is the power not to react, to go to the balcony instead, which is his metaphor of taking the all-important pause. So those are the headlines. The 3 discussion questions are, with all the numbers that are available in a job negotiation, which Lopp goes through and catalogs, how do we go to the balcony to understand the true prize, which is what Ury encourages us to do. And the second question, what's the most important subject in the conversation between a manager and the employee? And thirdly, what if the adaptive change in an organization is facing is replacing workers with AI? So those are 3 questions for the discussion. We've got 15 minutes to talk about this, so let me open it up for the first one. What do you think about that first question? Go ahead and jump in. No opinions on this one. All right, let's jump to the second question. What do you think is the most important subject when having a discussion between a manager and employee? We'll talk about the normal day-to-day one-to-one discussion. What's the most important, in your opinion, what's the most important conversation? There's not a right or wrong answer here. What do you think is most important?
Hi, it's Dylan. I think in terms of, the most important conversation between a manager and employee, I think on a day-to-day basis is making sure you're on the same page with your goals, right? Like I want to make sure that the things that I think are important for my day-to-day are the same things that my manager would agree are my most important goals for accomplishing whatever we need to as a team.
Okay.
Hello, it's Uche here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Uche. You're coming through a little bit garbled. Or do you have a headset or you have the microphone close to you?
Oh, sorry. I'm like actually driving, but
Okay. All right.
I'll say it real quick. I'll just say it real quick. I think the most important thing, like for day-to-day conversation, is for the manager to emphasize on why he wants the employees to do what they're doing, like for the what's the cause, so that the employee could actually understand, similar to being on the same page, but actually understand the why, so that their work, so that when they work towards like the goal, they're doing it with a purpose.
Okay. Good. So manager's responsibility is to articulate that bigger picture.
Hey, this is Mary Grace. One area that I would say it's really important between manager and employee discussions is just setting expectations and reaching a common baseline for what an employee expects, what a manager expects, and getting on the same page there.
Great. Okay. I think, Dylan, that's what you were trying to get at too in terms of alignment, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. Good. Good. All right. Those are all important answers. Anyway, do we have another hand raised?
Yeah. This is Spandan. I hope everyone can hear me.
Go ahead, Svana.
Yeah, I think the most important subject between a manager and employee should be like, if there is a task being given to a particular like set of employees, I think it's very important to show what kind of business value it's bringing to the organization. I think if they see that, oh, their work is actually doing or bringing some kind of positive impact to the organization, I think that'll motivate them to like do their like job to like the fullest potential. Like it'll unlock their intrinsic motivation to do it.
Good. Good. So that's taking alignment a step further and saying, so what impact is it having on the strategy of the organization? Yeah.
Yeah, this is Hojun.
Ivan?
I think another topic that needs to be discussed frequently is the challenges you're facing as an employee, because your manager usually is more familiar with the history of all the works that's been completed within the company, and he knows who to go to when you face certain problems. So whenever I share my challenges with my manager, he would direct me to, oh, we can talk to this person. He's done this work before. Maybe he can give you some references. Or if I need help with getting data from some other department, my manager can maybe bridge the gap between the two or stuff like that.
Good. Good. So a manager has the responsibility of being chief connector, if you will, and also remover of obstacles. And I had a manager once when I went to his office and I asked a question, and it had to do with headquarters, which was up in Waltham, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. We were in Manhattan, in New York, and he immediately picked his phone up and got the person on the phone, put him on the speakerphone, and got an answer and to solve the problem right then and there. And I was really impressed because it wasn't something he wrote down and said, "I'll get back to you." He he jumped on it right away, and I never forgot that. Okay, good comments on this one. What about this last one? And interesting that this is a reality that'll be facing all of you, I think, in many of the career work that you're doing for either your organizations or for your clients. What if the adaptive change an organization faces is replacing workers with AI? How would you advise a company like that?
I would advise the company to be ready to find meaningful work for their employees that is outside of what their normal job duties might have been that were replaced with AI.
Okay, good. Can you do some, so we talked about job rotation among managers last week. This may be a way of looking at job rotation in order to retain people in the organization in different roles. Good. Erin, you've got your hand up.
Hello.
Hi.
I feel like people are really good at making themselves busy. And often in organizations, people feel like they don't have enough time to get to like the innovative types of solutions. That's my phone ringing. And so I think with replacing workers with AI allows is for you to engage your employees in more strategy, more new development, more innovation.
Interesting. Yeah. Jack Welch argues that as jobs are eliminated, because in his era, it was jobs were going over to other countries, people in the existing organization ought to, as he said, move up the food chain to higher positions. Of course, what is that assuming? If you say, all right, well, the employees in an organization, if their jobs go away, they'll move up in the organization. What's that assuming?
I think that's kind of assuming that they have both that they're interested in moving up the chain and that they have the ability to, and that there will be enough work in that area for all of the employees.
Great. So is the opportunity there? Do they have the skills? Is there training that's needed? We've got two more people with hands up, and I can't see your names when there are multiple people, so please, whoever is first, go ahead. Rochelle.
Hi. So I would second the first comment. I think it was Stephen, if I'm not mistaken. I would say that it is really important also to recognize that the work tasks or challenges that AI might be tending to become a little bit more complex, and they still need a human set of eyes to kind of see things that fall through the cracks and manage and make sure that the machines are doing the job the way that they're supposed to do. And it can also cause new problems where, you know, a human doing that job didn't have to think about or like didn't have to worry about because you could catch that error. And so I think just recognizing those new challenges as well as the new opportunities where you can have someone shift their focus.
Right. So supervising the machines becomes an important role. Although the interesting question it raises is that if the ratio of supervisors to machines is like, let's say, for example, 1 to 10, that may be 10 less jobs on the front line.
Yeah, and I think it varies so much depending on the industry and like the job that's being replaced itself. You have something like, you know, in supermarkets when you have the self-checkout kiosk, you also have to think about, is your customer base equipped to actually use these interactive kind of self-scanning machines?
Right.
And sometimes the answer is no. I saw, you know, this is kind of spur of the moment, but I saw, you know, an older woman at the grocery store and had never used one of these machines before. The grocery was really packed with everything going on, and she didn't realize she was standing in a line for the self-checkout kiosks. And so she got to the front and she wasn't able to actually use that machine because she's never done it before. And so I was just very surprised to see that, since these machines have been out for a few years now, but there are people who have never taken the initiative to go out and use them. They still prefer, you know, the human element to get that job done.
Right. And if you notice, there's in each of those self-checkouts, I think both for security and for assistance, there's at least one grocery store employee or other type of store employees that they're in that area. And some, if there were a large number of checkouts, there may be 2 people there. But the interesting thing is that if you add up the people that are in helping to supervise and provide service in that area, the ratio of them to the actual kiosks, there's far more kiosks.
Right.
But you're right, as far as new people who are having to navigate this and do new things, you know, some people need some assistance on, you know, how to try this for the first time. And it can be very intimidating. Okay, any other questions about this? We're about 4 minutes from Martha joining us. So I'm listening for the bell when she joins us. She has Steve Rovniak is her right-hand person. He's helping her get online to do this. You have her slide deck. It is in the handouts folder in Canvas files, and it's also in the handouts channel in Slack. Hi, who just joined us? And you may be on mute. Ah, Martha, yes? No. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna introduce her, and hopefully she'll join us then. She's founder and president of Heller Search. She's been a contributor to CIO Magazine since 1999. She's written 2 books, one of which is one of our textbooks. She's written The CIO Paradox, about the contradictions of IT, and also then Be the Business, which we've been reading. I met her in, wow, it's like 14 years ago, when she conducted the search for NetHope's first CEO, and we worked with her and her firm closely to place the first CEO. She's one of the most widely followed voices on the role of the CIO. She does a number of podcasts, and is always, I think, one of the most knowledgeable people about what's happening in terms of IT leadership in organizations. So, Martha, are you on the line?
You don't see me? Do you see me?
Ah, now I see you. I see you when you I see you when you talk. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So
Then I'll have to talk constantly.
Are you going to share your desktop so that we can see your slides, or do you want me to?
I'm attempting. It told me I couldn't do it while you can't share screen while the other participant is sharing.
Ah, so I will stop sharing.
And I will start.
There we go.
And let's go find that PowerPoint. All right, let's hold on a second. There we go. Okay, now can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody else, can you hear and see, Martha?
Yes.
Okay, we got a few thumb ups.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Oh, good. All right, terrific. Well, Ed, thanks so much for that introduction. It's true, you and I go way back, and yet neither of us ever ages.
Well, I have a few more gray hair.
I don't have a single gray hair. So good. Well, it's nice to be here with everybody. So Ed, what I'm going to do, well, actually, let's go ahead and say what I'm going to do right here. I'm going to talk about what companies are looking for in a CIO. So, you know, all we do at Heller Search are IT leadership searches, the majority of those being CIO. And of course, you know, depending on the company, they might be looking for, you know, a supply chain optimization or re-engineering the e-commerce platform or something. But there's always a generic set of skills that every company is looking for in their CIO, and I thought I would talk through that list. I'm going to not only talk about what the skill is, but talk about what, as a recruiter, I'm really looking for and listening for during those interviews. And then I've just got a potpourri of career advice. I've been advising CIOs in their careers since, you know, the 50s. Just kidding, not the 50s, but for a long time now. And I'd like to offer you some of that. In fact, Ed sent me quite a few questions, very thoughtful questions that you've all put together. And a lot of them, I'm happy to say I hit on that career advice section. And then, of course, Q&A. Again, I selected some questions that I feel I don't cover during the presentation, and I'll hit on those. So
Right there, that one.
there we go. Oh, good. Now I have it all. I can see you. You can see me. We can see the content. It's going on. All right. So, you know, Well, let's talk about the first attribute, which is transformation. So just to put some context around this, you know, for a long time in this country, we were in the agrarian age. We were a bunch of farmers for a really long time. And then sometime in the late 18th century, very early 19th century, we became an industrial economy. And we had things like CFOs and boards of directors, and we had moats around our companies, and we built silos around our departments to create specialization, and we had big teams and big footprints. And then, I don't know, a couple of years ago, we moved into the digital economy. And in the digital economy, we have small teams. We've got small footprints. We partner right into our ecosystems with with other companies. We're removing the silos. Everything is different. However, the pace of consumer behavior change and the pace of technology change so far outstrips the speed with which a company can change the way it's managed for 1,000,000 years, its organizational structure. It can't change so fast. And so transformation is the #1 skill really for every executive, but certainly for a CIO. So if you think about the fact that every company is becoming a technology company right now, we're doing a search right now for a company that's a distribution and retail, a CIO search. And every conversation I have is about, with the company is about data. It's not about products. It's not about customers. It's about data. So we're all becoming a technology company. So we can't be IT way over here and the business over there. We all have to be almost cyborgs. We're a little bit technology, we're a little bit business, and we're a little bit data. And so how do you turn a company that was never that way into a company that is? Transformation by transformation by transformation. So when I assess transformation, what I'm looking for is somebody who has in their arena created such significant change that you would have to really work hard to dismantle it. So that can be a transformation in we created an entire culture that is focused on the customer from one that was focused on operations, but it could also be we put infrastructure in the cloud. That's a transformation. So it really depends on where the company is in terms of its life cycle, but transformation without question is the #1 skill that I'm looking for. And I'll steal from my career advice slide now and say for all of you in your roles, keep a log of transformations. It could be small. It could be I brought agile development into this one area that I'm working on. It could be I modernized a set of systems. But the more you log, write down on a resume, whatever, your transformational experiences, the more you will see yourself as a transformational leader. That's the biggest skill. The next is business acumen, and I can give an example here. We were doing a search, a retail search, the CIO search for Talbot's. And I asked a candidate who will remain nameless, when you joined that company, some other retail company, what was going on? And he went right to systems. Oh, the systems, point of sale, the IT org, there was low morale. And I gave him another shot to course correct. I said, yeah, but with the company, what was going on? Right to systems. Then I talked to a guy named Jaap van Ryle, who had been the VP of Digital Technologies at Tiffany. And I asked him the question, and he told me about foot traffic and market share. I mean, that's what he went right to. You know, can he go from there to talking about systems? Yeah, and he needs to. But when I ask an open-ended question like what was going on with the company, what I want to hear first is the same answer that I would get if I were talking to the CEO. To me, that's business acumen. So that's what I'm listening for on that attribute. Team development. Now, of course, team development, you got to, develop good teams, but that's the price of entry. What I'm really looking for is somebody who not only built a great team, but who actually changed the culture of the technology organization to be at one with the business, those cyborgs. So just, I'm sure you're all learning about this, but, product management. We took a bunch of project managers and we created a product management structure. And Ed, do you feel I should say 2 words about what a product management structure is, or do you think that's very clear?
I think most everybody in the class has either learned some or practiced some of project management. But let me just pause and see, does anybody want more explanation of that? Raise your hand. Okay, we're good, Martha.
Okay, so, for an example, again, I won't go into that, but, a blog that I'm going to post next week is by the CIO of Land O'Lakes. And what he's done, so he turned his team from a project management organization to a product management organization, right? Where we're all product managers. We care about market share. We care about our product. And what he did to really drive that home is he put in a 2-part incentive program. When you bring the product to market, and the product could be ERP, the product could be internal, but whatever, when you bring that capability to market, which could be external customers, it could be internal partners, employees, what have you, you get a bonus. Great job, on time, under budget, bonus. But then he's put in a long-term part of the bonus, where if the product is still delivering, the technology solution is still delivering business benefit in a year, then you get the bigger part of your bonus. So he's using that as a long-term incentive program, which is a talent retention device, which I think is so smart. But he's not just developing the team, he's creating the culture to be that integrated, IT integrated with the business. So I'm looking for more than to build a great team. Good, you're a CIO, you're supposed to do that. It's, have you changed the culture of the team in order to be the business? That's what that one is. Okay. Strategic thinking. Strategies are important, but ideas are cheap, right? It's all in the execution. So strategic thinking, of course, is what everybody wants in their CIO. And rather than tell you all about it, I'm going to quote one of my favorite CIOs, Les Ottolenghi, who drove a huge transformation at Caesars Entertainment, like top to bottom. And he writes or says, from the beginning, you have to be able to articulate your vision, the business outcomes, the end state, and all of the steps that have to happen to get from here to there. This means being very clear on the strategy, the most immediate operational changes, and the changes that will happen every day. You have to constantly connect the long-term vision to the day-to-day operational changes to the business drivers of the company. So when I ask somebody tell me about a strategy that you executed, yeah, I want to hear it, and I want to hear what the results are. But what I really want to hear is how did they, for everybody involved in the change, everybody impacted by the strategy, how did they connect the strategy to the way everybody's lives and work was going to change based on that change? So when you think strategic thinking, it's not just putting the pieces together and thinking strategically, it's how do you connect all of that to all of the operational changes that need to be executed by everybody involved. To me, that is strategic thinking. So, project execution, even though we love to think about IT as strategists and change agents and business leaders, in the end, stuff's got to get done. And when I can't think of I'm doing a CIO right now where there is no problematic project. This is all about innovation and strategy. But on almost every CIO search we've ever done, there's some awful project that hasn't yielded any business benefit and has cost millions of dollars. And so, near term is always come in and land the plane. That is the job. But what I'm listening for is, sure, you turned around the SAP project, you rescued the failing point of sale system during Christmas, You know, I want to hear all of that. But what I really want to hear is, and how did you make your team better at project execution? So it's not just, you know, complete a failed project. It's create an entire organization that is better at project management and project execution than when you left. So when you leave that team, they have the capability of project execution. That's what I'm really looking for, not did you save a project. So transparency in the way our clients think of it is not, do I do project update meetings that everybody's invited to? Do I publish our queue of projects on the intranet? It's none of that. Transparency typically means we want to understand the value of IT. We want to understand why we're spending money on things, what the value we're getting is. So what I'm really looking for under transparency is, have you turned your business partners from naive consumers of IT to informed co-investors? Now that can mean putting the IT budget in their P&L, but that causes a host of problems. Shadow IT, you know, that there's all different ways to do that through financial scaffolding. But the concept of transparency and the way our clients are looking for it is, have you created knowledge and input into the technology investment strategy as close to the place where that value is realized as possible? How are you involving the head of sales in the spending of the limited IT dollars as much as the CIO and the head of HR and whomever else? In other words, I think about it this way. I can't say to my own personal portfolio advisor, sure, invest in emerging markets, if I don't know what my whole portfolio looks like. So it's the ability of the CIO in collaboration, because that's the name of the game, with their business partners to create a structure by which we are all stakeholders in the IT budget. That's transparency, not my door is always open. So business partnership, you know, when I ask candidates about business partnership, they'll also say, oh, the chief marketing officer and I work really well together. We've got a great relationship. You know, and that's important. But what's more important is, how are you building business partnership all the way through the scaffolding of the organization? You know, are you, when I came into the company, a candidate will say, you know, we were trying to be all things to all people. It wasn't really clear who was working with which business. And so when I came in, what I did is I put in a structure where we had vertical alignment through, you know, the different business lines, but we had horizontal centers of excellence, like for an analytics capability. And I don't really care what the structure is. It's that they came in and they created a structure for business partnership. Not that they themselves are good business partners. Again, price of entry as a CIO. It's that they're creating a whole structure of business partnership underneath them. And as importantly, put it on an org chart doesn't mean it's going to work. It's pre-selling those new relationships and that new structure out to all of those stakeholders. That's what I'm looking for in business partnership. So communication. I know that I do not have a winning candidate on my hands when I ask about communication and they tell me about their newsletter. Now, I do publish a newsletter. So I am the last to, you know, cast aspersions on a newsletter. But what I'm really looking for in communication is, again, remember at the beginning of this discussion, we talked about we're all cyborgs now. So I get that, you know, IT needs to be the business, but the business has to start getting wise about technology. And for CEOs who have only ever done anything one way, and now they are the victim of their own success because it's the digital age. What got you here will not get you there. Your place in the value stream, CEO, is shifting. You will be disrupted unless you start thinking very differently about your business. That's the kind of communication that CIOs need to be having. And so I'll give you an example. So Curate Retail Group, Home Shopping Network, QVC, that kind of thing. Karen Etzkorn is the CIO there. So she comes in and she realizes, wow, our processes are completely broken as a result of and as a cause of the fact that our systems are broken. We have too many systems across all of these processes that should be seamless. We need a major investment in our systems in order to create seamless processes. Well, what CEO wants to hear that? And how do you make a CEO really understand the need for that investment? So she uses something called value streams, and you may all know about that. This was a little new to me. But she's got value streams. Supply chain is a value stream. Customer acquisition is a value stream. So she brought in this concept of value streams. She showed that customer acquisition is a value stream that is broken because it crosses so many different processes and so many different systems. So rather than saying we need to invest in a new CRM, we need to invest in a new e-commerce site, we need to invest, instead, she said to her CEO, this value, how important is customer acquisition to this company? Well, the answer is very important. So she said, then we need to invest in customer acquisition as a value stream. He got it. He saw the light and was able to invest. That's the level of communication, not, I let everybody know what we're working on. Okay. Technical depth. This one, it confounds me every time. So we did a CIO search for a $7 billion consumer products company with hundreds and hundreds of IT folks in the organization. And when the CEO had decided on the two finalists, cultural fit, transformational leaders, all the wonderful things, he said to me, but are they technical? And I thought, what does that even mean? Are they going to reconfigure servers and write code? They're awfully, that's below their pay grade, right? You don't want them doing that. And so I've been talking to CIOs in my network lately about what does technical depth these days even mean to you? And it's really one, I call it architectural sensibility. Do you understand APIs? Do you understand what a microservices culture or architecture is? That's one piece of it. Understanding how all the pieces fit together. Going and writing the code for an API, creating an API, no. But understanding why we might move to that architecture, for sure. And the other, a CIO, local CIO to me here in Boston, said recently, when I asked him, he said, I need to be able to go deep when I can. So if a vendor comes in and says, hey, this will work great in your environment, I need to be able to go deep and challenge that person. If there's a problem with the system, if something's going down, I need to be able to go deep. So it's people who don't spend all their time with the technology, because again, they're talking about value streams with the CEO, but it's got to be somebody who can dive deep into the technology when they need to. And I have to tell you, some of the most successful CIOs I know are just brilliant with technology. They are dazzling. They can sit down with a CTO and have a conversation. Can they go and review code the way a CTO can? Maybe not anymore, but they have deep understanding of the stack and how all the pieces work together. So ironically, like, you know, when CIOs sort of first came onto the scene in the 80s, it was all technology. It was MIS managers. Then ERP comes in. It's not about the technology. It's about business process, business process. Everything was, you know, you have to be process leaders. And now here we are, where our companies are becoming technology companies. And you're finding, I'll tell you, we did a search. This wasn't for our client was the CIO of a large supply company in Chicago. And they're done with SAP. They're not using SAP anymore because their whole business is changing because of digital, direct to the consumer. SAP, they relied on their innovation for years with whatever SAP was coming out with next. There isn't any off-the-shelf package to do what they want to do now to differentiate themselves. So all of a sudden, they're a custom development shop where they weren't before. That means that today's CIOs actually have to be technical too. But of course, you know, change the business as well. So I think when people say, oh, I'm not, you know, I'm not really technical because I'm a CIO. Well, you still have to put it this way. You got to be able to sit down with your CTO and push back. So I laughed when I wrote this. I thought, oh, 4 little words, right? 4 little letters for, you know, what is changing the world. So again, I'm doing a search right now for like a $2 billion retail company. And I was just interviewing a CIO today, and I realized our whole interview was about data. That's it. Data's changing the world. So yes, do you need to be able to go in and put in the tools and the ecosystem to serve up the data? For sure. Price of entry. But if that's all you do, you're not doing your businesses a service. You know, you can bring an executive to data, but you can't make him use it. Do you think your students know if you bring a horse to water, you can't make him drink? You think, are we too old? Does nobody know that? If you bring a horse to water, you can't make him drink. If you bring an executive to data, you can't make him use it. So this was actually years ago. I was talking to the CIO of Kraft. And it was when big data was coming around and foot traffic and whatnot and Twitter. Well, I don't even know if it was Twitter then, but social media feeds, all this unstructured data. And I asked him about it. He said, we've got the data. That's not my problem. My problem is the CEO and the COO of this multi-billion-dollar business that's been around for a long time. They have 3 KPIs they look at. And I don't know, last year's sales, this quarter sales, and something else. They're not looking at foot traffic and unstructured data. His job, half his job was to serve up the data. The other half was to turn his executive committee and the company into a data-driven company. Can't do it alone. And I know that there's a question on the list about chief data officer, which I'll address. But data is not about the technology. Data is about creating a culture that uses the data and not even uses the data, sells the data. Data is becoming a product line, which, by the way, is a really exciting opportunity for CIOs who want to get out of operations and start leading PM. So information security, you know, I would be remiss, right, for not putting information security on here. It's like, gotta have it. What I would say is on this, it's 2 things. One, and maybe this is even old by now, but, you know, for the longest time, information security was like the police that everything has to grind to a halt for information security to come in and put in its controls and all of that. With agile development, everything has to change. So in information security, it's really about, you know, agile, you know, DevSecOps, and it's embedding information security in an agile process. That's one. And the other is the board is no longer comfortable with, yeah, we're spending a lot of money and information security and we're doing our best. It is really, we did a search for a large insurance company, and the CEO said, on information security, what I want is a CIO, and it could be the CISO doing the presentation or whatever, but it's got to be putting information security into investment terms that the board will respond to. That is the skill now. And because again, a CIO isn't a CISO. A CIO is going to hire a CISO or a network security person. From the CIO, the skill is talking to the board about information security as an investment strategy. So my very last one is vendor management, which I've got to change the name of that. But again, what I'm going from are what CEOs are saying they want in their CIOs and their candidates. Vendor management used to be consolidate vendors, hold them to their SLAs, renegotiate contracts. That all has to happen. But vendor management today is more about creating an ecosystem of technology partners that actually API into our environments and having a venture capitalist lens. I just talked to a candidate today. I'm doing a lot of interviewing today, so this is very apt. I just talked to a candidate today who was the CIO of a huge, like an $18 billion global product supply company. And he and the executive committee had been seeing that their competitors were forming these venture groups in order to bring high-tech companies into their business who could then supply the new technology solutions that were going to allow for new product lines and all of this. You don't have to build everything yourself. And so he actually became the head of that venture group. So he's now had the experience of being a CIO and being a head of a venture group. He essentially was a VC. The CIO moved into leading a VC fund for his own company. So vendor management is less about managing vendors for a CIO than it is about having a venture capitalist eye on the marketplace to really make build or buy, partner or not even build, partner or buy decisions. So that's my list. I'm sure it'll change, keep changing and changing. But now what I would like to do is move on to some career advice. So the first I already alluded to, keep a log. When you're so busy, right, day-to-day operational stuff, writing code, right, keeping data centers running, all the things that you're doing, when you change something, whether it's a people thing or a technology thing or a process thing, and you have moved something from point A to point B, not completed a project, but created lasting change, write it down. One, you'll forget, and two, when you interview for a CIO job and somebody says, tell me about yourself, you want to be saying and thinking, I am a transformational leader. And the more you write that stuff down, the more you will see yourself that way. Understand the why. Everything you do provides customer or shareholder value. You shouldn't push a button, write a line of code, send an email without understanding how the money moves in your business and how what you're doing is related to that business. There's a lot of people around you can talk to who will be happy to explain to you how this affects shareholder value, or maybe already, you don't need to ask anybody, but have a consciousness about that. Establish an enterprise view. I'm hearing this all over the place lately. It's where I'll say to CIOs, if you could wave a magic wand over the people who report to you and change them in some way, change their thinking, they all say, or not all of them, but a lot of them lately are saying, I want them to stop thinking about their vertical, their function, their team, and think more about the enterprise. Because as the entire company shifts to being a technology company, the decisions about that technology, the innovation around that technology, the maintenance of that technology isn't going to belong to IT anymore. The CIO of Lear Corporation set up this very innovative model for self-service robotics process automation. So she's now installing RPA tools in the plants and letting the plant managers design their own robotics. Who who's the technologist? I don't know anymore. Sounds like the plant managers are. That's where we're going. But to Bonnie Smith at Lear to have come up with that, that's an enterprise view. Be cross-functional. This was I think it was one of the questions of like, when do you pick up, how do you shortcut, when do you pick up other experiences? If you have an opportunity and you're in a company where they offer something rotational and you can go be in sales or be in supply chain or be somewhere not in IT, raise your hand for that. If you have an opportunity to move through towers, maybe you're in applications and you have an opportunity to go into architecture, do it. Because the silos are coming down, cross-functional teams are the norm. You will spend more of your time in the future with people from sales, engineering, R&D, marketing, finance, than you do with IT people going forward. Knowing that, gain cross-functional experience. Know your customer. IT folks have a lot of access to customer data. When you're a CIO and you're in the executive committee and people only turn to you when it's an IT thing, you can turn that on its head by bringing in information about the customer. If you know what your customer wants, customer trends, you will be the most important voice in the room. So if you have access to Net Promoter Score stuff, whatever it is, the more you know the external customer and can bring that perspective to bear in any of your work, the more valuable you will be. Stay sharp on technology. Again, all I'm saying is leadership, 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 business, business, business. But for so many of the roles we do, all things being equal, you got to have all that. Who's the winning candidate? The one who's sharp on technology. Bring the outside in. I'll just one example of this that I love. A healthcare CIO, I know, doesn't go to healthcare conferences because everybody around him knows healthcare. What he does is he likes to go to CIO conferences at all different industries. So he's at a CIO conference and he met a CIO of a bedding manufacturer or retailer. And they did a joint venture together where they put sensors in pillows to help with sleep apnea, which he then deployed in his hospital. Ideas come from everywhere. The more you get outside your own culture, your own business, your own function, the better a leader you will be, the more valuable a leader. Finally, know yourself as a leader. When I interview CIOs and I say, tell me about yourself as a leader, and they say, well, I tell you, every single one says, I set a vision and I empower my team and I enforce accountability. And I think, ugh, I've heard that so many times. And I guess it's important. But so many companies offer Myers-Briggs and DISC profiles and all that stuff. Use those tools to be a student of yourself. The more you can articulate almost, I don't want to say metrics-based, but almost a data-driven articulation of who you are as a leader, one, the better leader you'll be, but also you'll do better on interviews. So that is my career advice. Ed, is it your suggestion that I just look to the list of questions and that I've run through and address some of those? Do we have time? We're doing fine on time, right? How are we doing?
Yes, we're doing very well on time. We probably have 20 minutes. Actually, I had a request from one of the students who wrote a bunch of questions. If we could, among the last 5 questions on the list, if we could just answer number 9.
Number 9. What advice do you have for someone who's either starting his or her career, shifting careers, been working to only one IT area to move into leadership roles? Is that the question?
I think it's the one after that. Sorry if I misnumbered them. It's the one about, as we've seen in your company's website, books, articles, and heard from Professor Happ, you are specialized in high management executive recruiting.
Yes. That's the one. Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
I only read the last part of that.
Okay.
So what advice do you have to move into leadership roles? You know, one thing I would say is raise your hand for high profile projects. Raise your hand for the tough projects. Something, you know, when it's the project that everybody walks away from and says, I'm not doing that. That's high profile. That's risky. That's the one you want to step into. So that would be one suggestion that I would make. Another is, and this does come up elsewhere on the list here, is find a mentor. I would find 2 mentors. One, I would go for an IT leader who is not in your company and who is a level above. That's one mentor I would find. And another is someone in your company who is a business leader. Maybe it's somebody in finance, somebody in marketing. I would get both of those mentors. And in terms of how do you do that, you identify them. That's through networks. You know, everybody goes to IT, association meetings, things like that. It could be a former boss, maybe. And when you ask them for mentorship, it's got to be very structured. You know, will you be my mentor? My goal is to talk to you for a half an hour every month. And then I'd like every quarter for us to meet in person for X amount of time. I'd like this to be a year-long engagement, and at the end of that, we can establish. So I would find a mentor in IT, in another company, and one in the business, in your company. Make it structured, and that's going to give you a tremendous amount of insight that will lead you into more management roles. The other thing is, this is the other thing. Make sure you're a great communicator. I mean, I have to tell you, there are all sorts of things that I do. Just because you've communicated something doesn't mean that thing has been communicated. So if I go and I say to somebody, okay, we're going to do this and this and this and this. I'm sure people are annoyed by it, but I always say, play it back. Let's hear it. What did we all agree to? And I discover, oh, we missed some things. So I would say, when I ask CIOs how they identify their up-and-comers, it's communicators, it's people who are good with relationships, it's people who can connect the technology to the money. So I would work on all those soft skills as you're developing your technology depth. That would be my advice on that one. Okay?
What question on the list grabbed your eye, Martha? And maybe we could do that one.
Sure. Well, there was one that I thought I really liked is, as we learned in this class, IT is at the heart of the business, etc. What do you think is the most essential or most often misunderstood piece of information that non-IT people should understand about IT? I love that question. So when for years, I've been asking the question of CIOs who were never in IT and suddenly find themselves in IT, where their first job in IT is CIO. They were head of supply chain, utility executive, whatever, and now they're leading IT. And I always say, what do you, now knowing what you know, what do you wish you had known when you were a business partner to IT? And they always say complexity. They just never realized how complex it is and how you change one thing over here, you got to change it over here and over here and over here. And the reason things take a long time is because they're incredibly complex. That's the first thing. And the other is that IT has to be engaged in business strategy conversations right from the beginning. The notion that you call IT when it gets technical, that is a thing of the past. So those are the two things. When I talk to, newly minted CIOs fresh out of marketing and I say, how's it going? They say, I didn't know how complex it was. And I kick myself every time I had a meeting about, big marketing strategy and IT wasn't at the table. So those are two things. Another question I'll hit on, I like this one, number 13. How much literacy of finance, admin, accounting do you need to be a successful leader? What if you've never had formal education in these fields? What I would say is, the language of business is finance. And the more, again, going back to this mentor thing, go find somebody in the finance organization, take them to lunch, and ask them all about what they do and how this connects to that. And when you are working on a budget, go and talk to a finance person and make sure you really understand how it all works. Because, boy, even the CIOs that I was talking to today for this search, I said, well, what happened in that search? And he said, well, our EBITDA is down and we were over leveraged by 22%. So we liquidated this. And I thought, oh, right, it's all finance. So I would say, no. Do you need to go be a CPA? Do you need to go, get a degree in accounting? Certainly not. But I would be a student of finance and become as conversant in finance as you can. And look, you can take it online, do something online. There's all sorts of free stuff. But I would become very, very curious about how the numbers move around the work that you're doing. And the one more that I'll do is your chief data officer question. And that is, what do you think about chief data officers who've been coming up in numerous companies these days? How do they differ from CIOs? So I've become extremely interested in this lately. And I would say still for the most part, chief data officers are reporting to CIOs so far, for the most part. And the reason it's different from a CIO is a CIO is worried about infrastructure and operations and help desk and applications and e-commerce and mobility and all of that. But data is, science and governance and technology and revenue. So much so that I think we're going to start seeing more chief data officers reporting right to CEOs. But the thing about data science is you got to know enough math to be able to read the data. Then you've got to be able to identify patterns in the data. Then you've got to be able to identify business opportunities in that data. Then you've got to be able to sell those business opportunities to somebody who's going to fund it. So it's a very high value and unique skill. And to have CIOs be responsible for all of that, it's too much, and data is too important. But I think we're going to start seeing more chief data officers reporting to the CEO, looking across the company for data revenue opportunities, and the CIO and the CDO are going to be best friends, really joined at the hip. That's my expectation there. So, I guess what I would say is, one of the questions here is, why do you love IT? Why do you focus so much on IT and the CIO? And what is amazing to me is that now more than ever, and ironically today in this situation we all find ourselves in, even more so, technology is the thing that's going to make or break a company. And yet CIOs are still not always considered as important as other executives. And that has been mind-boggling to me for so long that I've just found it endlessly fascinating. And, I'd like to conclude this by saying, You know, we are all in a, you know, a situation with our global situation that we didn't anticipate. I think we're all still a little shell shocked. I know I am. I got to move in for myself and my family into a new normal where this is the world we're in now, which we will see this in the rearview mirror. We don't know when, but we will. Technology is going to become incredibly important to our recovery. So for all of you, your ability to come in and increase the technology capabilities of your companies, yeah, okay, remote work for right now, but our world is going to become a world that is more dependent on technology than ever. So your work that has always been so important is even more important now. And I'm personally, and I'm sorry to be a downer at the end of this, Ed, but I'm too sad right now to give you my my motivational, you know, the world is bright and you guys are, you know, you all of you are gonna, you know, have great careers, because you are. But I'm gonna shift it and say, your work has become more important than it ever has been. And while right now you are each, I'm sure, facing your own version of shell-shocked, can I say this without sounding awful? Your careers have never been brighter. So that's it for me.
That's great.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Martha. This has been
All right.
wonderful. Appreciate you spending all this time with us. If anybody has a follow-up question, would you prefer that they relay that to me and then I send it to you?
Or write to me. Here's what I would say.
Okay, good.
Come to Heller Search, write on your phones, sign up for the Heller Report. My next blog, this week's blog was on crisis. This week's Heller Report was crisis management, relevant to all of you. Next, we're going to start talking digital transformation again, but I read all that email. So get the Heller Report, respond. I see it all. Okay?
Terrific.
All right, good. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Always
Have
a
good
pleasure
night.
to chat with you, Martha.
You too, Ed. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
you too. Bye-bye.
Go grab a refreshment, stretch, and we'll start up again in 5 minutes, okay? Let's start up again. Actually, let's start up again at 7 o'clock. Let's take a 10-minute break. See you then. Hello, everyone who's coming back. We're going to start up in about another minute.
How's life in space there, Ed?
I'm orbiting the hairball.
You are.
But actually, if you've seen this background before, you know if I lean to one side, you can see the sun coming up.
Or is it going down? Tough to tell in this weather.
Well, I'm going to be the glasses half full on this and say it's coming up. Maybe a bit in the distance, but we'll get back to sunlight at some point.
It's going to take a minute.
All right, let's get started again. If hopefully everybody, can you see my screen? It should say attendance and feedback with the link that I also posted in Slack for the attendance one, but also so you can provide some feedback on Martha's presentation. And then if you don't quit out of the forum, but keep it to the side so you can add comments about this class at the end of the session. I'll put this link up again when we get there. Okay, so I said we were going to shift gears. We were going to talk about a later lecture. So we're skipping down to lessons from crisis response, which was our second to last unit, and then we'll come back to the other two units after today. But I thought it more appropriate to talk about this one now. And the key question is for those of us, for looking at IT leadership and IT management, what can we learn from crisis response, and what can we learn from humanitarian disasters? To tell you a story, about, this is a picture of George Clooney in the movie The Perfect Storm. That's not me in the East River of New York, although the story takes place there. I was vice president of operations. This is for a stock market systems provider. So they were providing real-time stock information from the exchanges. And we were on the top floor of a skyscraper, actually 34th floor in downtown New York, right next to the East River. And in this perfect storm of the century, which was at the last Friday in March, the East River, it hit the coast. The storm hit the coast, the East Coast, with a hurricane, a storm surge, and a high tide at the same time. And so that's often why it's referred to as perfect storm. The East River flooded downtown New York, and we had 13 feet of seawater in the basement. When you can imagine what that did to all the electrical circuits and the telco circuits, they were all fried and destroyed. But we had 2 days to recover before the market opened on Monday morning. We couldn't get a generator or people near the building. Our plan was actually, we had a portable generator, and the disaster recovery plan was to wheel in that generator and connect it to the power grid in the building and bring the computer systems back. But we couldn't get the generator near the building because it was flooded. And then once we pumped out the basement, we had the electricians in rebuilding all of the circuits, all the telco, and the crews. They worked like 48 hours straight through. And by late Sunday, power and communications had come back. And then the unthinkable happened. An electrician disconnected the generator at the wrong time, and it crashed all the systems. We missed the opening of the stock market on Monday morning, and customers lost millions of dollars. Our brand was damaged, and an organizational crisis ensued. I learned 3 lessons from this. One is that a single backup plan, or an A plan, is not enough. And a leader needs to go to the line of fire in a crisis. I was running this response from my home in Connecticut, and the approach I should have taken is whatever it took, get there to the line of fire, where my people were working on this. And then resiliency is critical in a crisis. And this is resiliency we talk about in crisis informatics, is the ability to bounce back, and that can determine your career. So I had to did a quick study with some consultants and came up with a plan, and I had to sell our co-CEOs. We had 2 of them, which made life interesting. I had to sell them on a more resilient IT infrastructure so that this would never happen again. And we called it an insurance program, and they understood about insurance, and so that was the metaphor we used to describe it. But the premium payment was $3 million. You know, remember now, this is back in the mid 1990s, so $3 million then is a bit more now. They agreed, and so we went then and put a generator on the roof. We put uninterrupted power supplies in the floor below where the data center was, and so these are the things that you saw when you took the data center tour. We didn't have in place for a Wall Street real-time data company. So real-time means as the stocks and bonds are trading, the data is being pumped out to customers so that they can make decisions about their trading as the markets move. So the fact that that wasn't backed up robustly is in hindsight is just unconscionable. So why talk about crises? Well, as you probably noticed in the Phoenix Project, it seems that every chapter starts with a crisis, with a severe one, IT outage, and it's about a failure of a bet the business IT project, which is what Phoenix was, and how Bill Palmer and the others in his team and off his team acted in a crisis and bounced back from that. It was a critical part of the story. We're living in a crisis now, as Martha indicated at the end of her talk. We're isolated, we're fearful for ourselves and our families, and we're also dependent on the technology to stay connected while distancing. And I have a slide a little later on in the deck, that essentially the technologies we're using to stay connected now and do something like this class, they didn't exist 10 years ago, or at least the specific companies and systems we're using now did not exist 10 years ago. And to get any work done where organizations have closed their doors, you can't conceive of it without technology. So we're in a very important recovery role. Some lessons from disaster response. So one of the avenues that we talk about in crisis informatics is the scope of the crisis, going from personal crises through organizational crises up to international crises. And this class has been focused on organizations and organization crisis in terms of the Phoenix Project. And we can draw some lessons from what's done in international crises. Well, this is a picture of the aftermath of one of the villages that was destroyed after the 9.3, I think it was, earthquake off the coast of Japan, and the tsunami that hit afterwards, and then the nuclear meltdown that followed in March of 2011. And the devastation is unimaginable. It just impacted everything. So in a large-scale disaster, we're not talking about a system outage or an application outage or a network failure. We're talking about the outage of an entire socioeconomic context. This is much broader. In the stages of a disaster response, disasters go through these 5 stages. Preparedness being before the disaster, that first response, which is usually in the first hours or days after the disaster strikes, scaling up and going then into a transition over a longer period of time. In Haiti with the earthquake, for example, that period was 5 years following the Haiti earthquake. And then a learning phase, and that feeds back into being better prepared the next time. And then a question we can ask ourselves is, so where are we now in the COVID virus crisis? What would you think? Where are we now?
This is Rochelle speaking. I would say we're probably in between preparedness and first response because we were not prepared for this. There's been talk about trying to scale up, but it's not meeting the needs. So I don't think we're there yet. I would say we're still trying to manage first response while simultaneously getting prepared for something we're not prepared for.
Yep, good. Okay, good. We had 2 more hands got raised. Who else had a comment? Remember to take yourself off mute.
Hey, this is Mary Grace. I would say that we're probably between, or in my perspective, we're between first response and scaling up. I think if you think about the U.S. as a whole, we've had some initial response in places like Seattle, and I think that other parts of the country are trying to scale to anticipate further expansion of the virus.
Exactly. We haven't achieved the scaling up yet. And so we're somewhere before scaling up, whether in fact we're before first response or after first response, I think we could debate. Where's China right now?
Hey, it's Nick. I'd say they're somewhere with the transition stage, maybe towards learning at this point. With all the data they're collecting and putting out.
I have to respectfully disagree, Nick. This is Ho Jun speaking. It's really hard to determine without the transparency from the Chinese government.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. This has been, we are not getting good enough data from them to really figure out where they are. It would be good to have it because we need it, but we just don't have it yet.
Well, if you take into consideration the fact that they haven't had a reported case or new reported case, I guess there is some indication that they are past where at least scaling up stage, in my opinion.
Yeah, based on the data that we have, and you're right to question, whether the data is complete or it's accurate. But the data that's flowing through Johns Hopkins, which is been a clearinghouse for all the various reporting, has essentially said there's been no new cases reported in China in the last few days. That would suggest that they're in transition mode. We need to watch that carefully because, as we know, when they were in the first response stage, there was all of a sudden a change in data reporting that caused a spike. And the Johns Hopkins data, you can actually look through that and see where that spike occurred as the data was brought up to date. And in fact, it was worse than had first been thought. But based on what we know so far, they're certainly in a later stage than the U.S. One might argue that Italy's in the scaling up phase right now, if you look at some of the numbers. But the point is that each country in a pandemic, each country is going through this type of cycle. And trying to learn and figure out, when they come through the peak and then into the point where there are no more new cases. And then going back and saying, so who has already gone through some of these stages ahead of us? What can we learn from them? Is an important question to ask. Is there anything we can do different based on the experience that went before us? So the information sharing, which is a large part of what IT people look at, becomes particularly important in the midst of a crisis. There are multiple factors to look at and the priorities of these factors in a humanitarian response. ER is the emergency response phase. The transition phase is the next one, and then the development or long-term recovery phase is this third one. And the factors of cost, speed, quality, and volume change. In an emergency, when you're in the midst of emergency relief, speed is the most important. Volume, can you provide enough relief or response to a large enough or growing population? And cost and quality. Cost is the least, and quality is good enough. Quality is good enough. That changes when you go to longer term humanitarian organizations, where then quality is probably number one, and cost goes down to number two. And these factors are 1 to 4, obviously, and across time may go from days to years when you're going through the emergency response into the long-term development. As I mentioned, Haiti went through a 5-year recovery after the earthquake, and in a number of ways, one could argue that they haven't fully recovered even yet today. So time and volume are king, emergency response, and in development, cost and quality reign. There are 10 lessons that we can take from disaster relief in terms of managing our own organizations. So if we're in the IT manager seat, these are 10 things we look at. I'm not going to go through all 10 of these. And there's a handout that talks about some of these as well. I just want to talk about briefly about costs and resilience. And the thing about resilience is expecting things, to go wrong. Planning is being prepared, but that may not be, in fact, what you have to implement as the context and situation changes. As we saw in the previous slide, costs are last in the midst of an emergency. And you can see evidence of that in terms of what the US government is doing and approving in terms of spending. It's almost as if, one group is trying to outdo the other in terms of how large a package they're proposing, which is again an indication that, cost is not the concern. Can we do something quickly? Can we have something that impacts the economy and the country as a whole? Resilience in the dictionary is, is this ability to spring back or rebound. It's similar to elasticity, or as I called earlier, the bounce back. So crisis is a shock to the system or a derailment. We certainly have seen a derailment in the ways that we live our lives and pursue our education. It most impacts those who are the most vulnerable in our society and in other societies. But resilience is that ability to bounce back from it. And we already see cases of people exhibiting that resilience. On the Crisis Informatics Slack channel, I posted a link to a video of some of the residents in Milan, Italy, singing songs of thanks to the healthcare workers in the hospital across the street. Nobody was, they were in lockdown, they were not allowed out of the buildings, but they could sing out of the buildings. And it was just a wonderful example of resilience, certainly resilience of spirit. In an organization, you're asking yourself 5 questions. How fast can you bounce back from a disaster? Well, the first part of that is, how long is this disaster going to last? Who's going to do it? Who's in charge? I mentioned earlier about an A plan. It's important then also to have a B plan, which is what I learned on Wall Street in New York. How do you improvise if both fail? And then when was the last time you practiced and tested your plans? For an IT manager, this is an important question as to, when did you last test your disaster recovery plan? When did you last test? And I asked that question of Eric Lakin when we were down in the at the data center. When's the last time you ran a test of your generators or a test of your power backup? And how often do you do that? And what problems were uncovered and things like that? That's a sort of the ABCs or IT management 101 when you're running operations. Let me pause here. Any questions about what I've just said before I turn to applying this to management? Dan, yes. Dan, you may need to come off mute.
Oh, sorry, I didn't have a question. I was just unselecting the raise hand.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Anyone else, or I'll move on? Okay, so this is handout number 1. It's on the Slack handout channel. It's also in Canvas files, handouts. Hopefully you had a chance to download that before. This is some work that we did at the International Red Cross. Actually, Jeremy Mortimer and I put this together in terms of if there are these 10 factors of crisis on the left, what's the humanitarian response, is that first column after that. And then the middle column is what's our IT disaster response plan lesson. And then what's the management lesson is over on the right. Let me see, did I have I did not circle one of those. What do you think? So here, oh, I did put Phoenix in here, good. So if you notice on the last column, third down, Eric, makes the point, and this is in terms of the lean, being lean in a crisis, remove anything that does not add value. Remember, he says that to John. And then we also, a few rows down from that, we talked about the iron triangle and project management, vary the scope to shorten the time and the cost, is another aspect. And right below that, the Phoenix lesson about continual launches and fixes as a way to, one way to implement resiliency. Google does this as a matter of practice, the concept of the perpetual beta. So this is a way of some of these concepts are taken right from lessons that we learned in disaster response. And then if we look at the scope of the crisis, again, an organizational crisis is where we are in the Phoenix Project. The other avenues here are severity of the crisis and then the context of the crisis. well, in this case, we have a moderate severity of the crisis in Phoenix. We're at least in a severe, maybe worse in the COVID virus. The context of the crisis, here for Phoenix, it's in a developed country. We, in fact, are probably seeing COVID being an impact on all contexts, it being as a global disease. As I look at the maps of where cases are reported, the map is looking, pretty filled in terms of, at least a few cases in every country. Okay. And then in crisis informatics, so this in terms of doing a technology overlay, which is what the bottom matrix is. The top matrix are what are examples of these. So we have in Phoenix, for example, we have a moderate organizational failure when the payroll system failed in Phoenix. The next box over, in the Denver International Airport baggage case, which is one of the next assignments we'll talk about in a minute, is is a more severe organizational type of situation. And seasonal flu I had down as a mild international crisis, and then the backup was, well, you could get a flu shot or have travel masks. Well, we're seeing that there is no shot for COVID, and travel masks might prevent you're spreading the germs to someone else, but don't really work well for protecting you against the keeping the germs out from you. And a manual system, maybe an antidote in the case of a payroll failure. So this is a framework for trying to understand the different types of disasters, and on an organizational level, where, what are some of the possibilities. So there are types of, so your question is, well, how do you prepare for these things? I raised that question, earlier as well. One is from running simulations. So there are tabletop exercises, there are games that you can play. There's a drill. We've all experienced fire drills, and so that's a fairly common one. And then there are full-scale exercises that may take place, over a number of days, to actually go through all of the activities that one would do in response to a disaster. Michelle Abersol, professor at the nursing school, who also runs the simulation lab at the nursing school, we took a field trip to see her operation last semester, and she talked about these different types of simulation exercises. Some of them using technology, some of them not. Question is, did Parts Unlimited run any of these for the Phoenix crashes? We won't be able to answer, did Denver International Airport do that yet? We haven't read the case yet, but what do you think from a Phoenix perspective? Did Phoenix run any of these tests? Parts Unlimited?
This is Dylan. I think so. I think that they tried to do several things, including most especially the drill, where they keep trying to figure out where, the problem point is in terms of project management. And that was something that they kept doing different iterations of, and just making sure that that specific function within the company was actually going to run smoothly, so they would prevent all of the issues that kept happening as a result of it.
Yeah, you certainly see them adding tests as the story, proceeds. There seems to be a large absence of those, early on. But one example is when the initial launch of the system failed. One of the things they didn't do, which is a fundamental test in IT, is what's called stress testing. Can you simulate a large load? In this case, it was all of the remote stores that were using the system. Can you simulate a large load on the system to see how the system, behaves? And that's something they didn't do, although everybody in operations, raised the concern, and management didn't listen. saying that the system probably was going to crash, and of course it did. So yeah, what you see unfolding, Dylan, you're absolutely right, is you see unfolding a greater sense of the importance of testing and adding those in, certainly on the project management side at first. And that's a large part actually of what DevOps is about, is testing and purposefully considering the operational context as you go through each step of the development. Okay. What about some personal strategies, be they IT or be they otherwise? One of the things we can learn from William Ury in the short video we saw is, take a deep breath, pause, go to the balcony. Don't act too quickly in terms of when there's panic. There's a tendency, what did Ury say? There's a tendency to write something that only later you will regret. And he talks about the send button being, or the send button or the send to all button being a, one of the worst features, certainly in email systems. And he said, what does he say? Whoever watched that, can you say what he says to do instead of send to all when you have sort of that angry email drafted?
Well, he said to put it away and sleep on it.
Right? Exactly. Exactly. You say basically leave it in your drafts folder, right? And save it there as a draft until later. And even if you've done that in Instant Messenger, you can copy what you wrote and paste it elsewhere on a note or something and save it and go back and look at it the next day and say, after you have the balcony of space sleep of overnight. And so that phrase in U.S. culture, which often in deal making, was I'm going to sleep on it. Essentially, it means I'm going to take a pause and then look at it again after the pause. Triage is another aspect in disaster response, and there's an important personal application about working on what's most important, most urgent first, and delaying the things that are less urgent and less important. Bill Palmer certainly focused on that. And then getting to root causes, this asking why 5 times, which we heard from one of our guest speakers, and that this is sort of Eric and his Yoda role, doing that with Bill. And then building success momentum, one small victory after another, so looking for the small successes. Tom Fenholt, our dean, said in his daily update today, hey, we made it through 7 days. Let's take a celebratory breath now because we've gotten through the first week. And then celebrating those wins. Patty's fast laptop provisioning is an example of that in the Phoenix project. So those are some things that we can think about and do. And then, 2 more. Learning and changing the process. So this is the whole book of Phoenix, is another thing that we can do. And then prepare, having that A plan, the B plan, and then knowing how to improvise, having a strategy for, how do we shift and learn from each step along the way. And if you want an inspiration for doing that, take a look at the video clip on the Apollo 13 movie where they had to respond to the CO2 crisis that was happening up in the spacecraft. And they had to figure out how to make a filter with a limited set of supplies on the ground is a good example of that. If you don't see that anywhere, let me know and I'll send you a link to that video. And then lastly, remember that people make things happen, and that's a key takeaway for this course. So relying on your team, knowing who your support structure is, even if you can only reach out to them on phone or on social media, this is a good time to keep in contact and and being a part of a support group. Okay, so let me talk specifically, because I've been thinking, I got asked to think about this from the ILO Institute, which I've been a part of off and on for the last 15 years. Peter Teams, who's the CEO there, said, so how should we be thinking about this virus and crisis informatics and IT and IT management, organization management? So these are the slides that I showed them earlier today. And in crises, we have, we looked at one time element earlier in the presentation. There's another type of time differentiation, which is, and in humanitarian organizations, we often talk about, well, is this a sudden onset disaster, which certainly earthquakes and tsunamis are, or is it something that we know we have a few days warning on, like at a hurricane or a wildfire, or is it something that is slowly unfolds in terms of, drought and famine migration? And so the onset time and the duration time are two factors. The Spanish flu in 1918 is something that had a medium duration and a medium onset, and similarly the COVID-19 in 2020. The magnitude and scope of both of those. So if I drew these as bubbles to make a third dimension on this chart, Spanish flu would be a huge bubble because it impacted a huge percentage of the Earth's population at the time. COVID is still unknown on its total impact, but this is I think arguably a 100-year event. We can pick big events out, between 1918 and now, but this may end up being a 100-year event. And the question is, how do you plan for a 100-year event? On the IT side, we thought about this and talked about this when we were looking at operations, sudden onset failures, like an electrical failure, a total electrical outage, for example. There was all sorts of backup prepared for that at the Mac data center that we saw. Network outages. Some of you may be experiencing, I know some of my colleagues are experiencing outages with Blue Jeans. Purportedly because Blue Jeans in their network headquarters is not handling the load very well, not as well as Zoom is. Hardware failures and software failures, I think we've all experienced. And then there is, when we do planning for disaster response in IT, we typically look at the fire scenario. So if a fire was to hit the building and it was to take out our data center and we couldn't go in the building to rebuild it or repair it, how do we continue the business under that scenario? And typically that's what also maybe we call the insurance threshold. We want to ensure things are backed up to that threshold. But then when we look at the pandemic, which is similar to 9/11, is a people outage. You may have a great business continuity plan, but you may not have the people, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And then the emergency preparedness, the money that we spend in organizations is probably an opposite shaped curve. We'll spend more money on, infrastructure types of things and backing those up. And if we don't have them in our own organization, then those costs are at the partner or, the cloud companies, for example. We're ultimately paying for it. And it is at usually a higher rate than we plan for higher level failures. Risk framework. So we looked at risk in one of our previous classes. The impact versus likelihood is a common risk framework. And the decision you have to make is that if you have scarce resources, which risk would you address first? And then we developed or talked about this concept of a risk frontier. So this is again like the optimal insurance threshold on the previous slide. And you want to work on the things on the top right, and may defer or accept the things that are on the bottom left. However, and this is what Bob Charette mentioned last week, there is this phenomenon called black swans, which are things that have high impact, but they're low likelihood. As he mentioned as well, COVID-19, in fact, may be an example of one of those black swans. The IT operating stack we looked at in a previous lecture, containing these various elements in the stack, and the IT operations manager is either managing those directly, or they're managing the people who are managing those, and that may in fact be partners in a cloud-based solution, for example. And then we also learned about the more of the supporting surrounding infrastructure, security, climate, and electrical, also being managed by you and your IT team. And questions we ask as IT managers is, where is my single point of failure? What's my B plan, if electricity fails? So we saw, very concrete examples of that at the MAC Center at UM. But a key single point of failure is you and your people. So if you're managing and your people are managing these aspects of the IT stack on the right, well, what happens if the people are all out ill? That's a scenario that we see in a pandemic, like what we saw in 9/11 for companies who lost most of their people in the 9/11 tragedy. And that then becomes a key important a single point of failure. If we take a look at this as an oversimplification, but if you look at the IT imperative in an organization, maybe 60% of the organization's IT is focused on the external customers and 40% on the internal employees and systems. And so, the imperative is, well, keep the customers running and then keep the systems and employee running. And what's happening with COVID is that all the internal people are becoming external customers. We're all remote individual users coming into systems of an organization one at a time, as individual users. And so that's an important shift for the IT department in terms of how systems are monitored, how they're run, how support is provided, et cetera. And some have argued that, well, we have a business continuity plan, so that should be taking care of this. If we've done a good job with our business continuity plan of how do you keep the business running if a major catastrophe takes out the business. But if you lose your team, who runs the business continuity plan? And that's the 9/11 scenario for companies like Cantor Fitzgerald, for example, and it's also a COVID question as well. Except in the case of a pandemic, your backup team may also be out. And so that's an even more radical impact of a crisis. So what's the worst case for organizations? What's the last resort choice? Shut down the business. We're actually seeing many businesses, close their doors, hopefully not permanently, but at least for the next 30 days. And probably we'll see, more cases in Europe. They shut down, and I think we just followed suit on that. I think in Michigan, are shutting down all cafes, all restaurants, and they're only providing, curbside services, for example. And one strategy may be thinking about, well, can your backup team be quarantined? Or have you already quarantined your A team or your B plan? Can you talk to them about, so if you're depending on cloud vendors, is the conversation you're having with your cloud vendors now, how are you isolating your team that's running your data centers? So I depend on a company called Prominic for some of the Lotus Notes work that I have had over the years. They sent a note out saying, all their employees are working remotely. They have a skeleton crew that's on site, and they expect no impact on their system. We'll see how that works out. Amanda Ripley wrote a very important book. She's a journalist and for Time Magazine and others, and a very readable book she wrote looking at disasters over the last 100 years. And she talks about 3 Ds of this arc of disaster response. So the response level, starting off with almost inaction or freezing at the bottom, and then high action up at the top on the y-axis, the x-axis, then of course the time as it unfolds, and that may actually be a matter of seconds or minutes. And the phases that she sees examples of in almost every disaster she studied is going through this initial denial. That's when people freeze up, deliberation, and then that decisive a moment when people then decide that they're going to act, and then action, of course, becomes the top response. And a question that I ask company managers is, so where are you on this? Where's your organization on this? Hopefully you've moved past denial and deliberation, and you're already taking action. But realizing that you need to move through this rather quickly. Amanda talks about in a case of airplane crashes, it's not actually the impact that kills people. Mostly it's the fire and smoke. And you've got about 20 seconds, 15, 20 seconds to get out of the plane to avoid the fire and smoke. And so oftentimes where people totally freeze up in the beginning, they train the stewardesses to scream at you, to shake you out of your frozenness and to get up and out, out of the plane. And so that then becomes then the decisive moment. Resiliency and improv. So resilient people is an interesting paper done in Harvard Business Review back in 2002. And the three characteristics of resilient people is, the first thing is they have accept reality. This is a Jack Welch mandate as well when he was running GE, is facing reality. And then having a deep set beliefs and values that life is meaningful, and then an uncanny ability to improvise, to change and try and adjust and figure out what's going to work. You can bounce back from any hardship or crisis if you have just one or two of these qualities, but you'll truly be resilient if you have all three. And then these three characteristics also hold true for resilient organizations. This is Diane Coutu in her article on how resilience works. And improvising, that's about the end, trying to build on it, trying some things, seeing what works, building on the things that works, throwing away the things that are not working, and adjusting as you go. And by and large, this is how innovation works in most organizations. You run trials and experiments, you see what works, you do more of that or adjust things, and what doesn't work, you throw away. That's a scientific approach on innovation. So how do you decide the ethical questions in terms of, what is your basis for your actions? Are they going to be based on principles, or are they going to be based on expediency on the left-hand axis? And that varies depending on whether the urgency of the crisis are low or high. So in humanitarian organizations where I come from, development programs are very principle-based. And they tend to be more, medium in terms of urgency. Emergency relief is certainly high urgency, and you have more pragmatic actions that happen, but still pretty much grounded in principles. But then you have the Syrian civil war and refugee crisis, where in talking with the Secretary General of the Syrian Red Crescent, who spoke at one of my classes, talked about having all passwords and all encryption removed from every device. And I said, how could you do that? You're not protecting the beneficiary data. And he said, no, I'm protecting my workers, because if ISIS stopped you and you had encryption or you had password blocking it, then you were at risk, because they believed then you were lying or hiding something. So they took the position of taking open text as being worker safety was more important, and therefore the expedient action in counter to the principles. Actually, Dylan Kilby, a student from last semester, is doing an independent study paper precisely on this. The Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone, openly sharing databases of Ebola cases and deaths, and for the many agencies that were responding in that region, and the data, and this is all done on spreadsheets in Google. So in a rather insecure environment, because in order to stop that disease, sharing a maximum amount of information was critical. And we're seeing the similar thing happening now in COVID-19. But openly sharing health data in the US, you got to be kidding. Don't we have a lot of regulations against that? Well, as of March 17th, Health and Human Services and the government, they issued a limited waiver of HIPAA sanctions so that more information could be readily shared for stopping the disease. So again, the context matters. And this is often referred to as situational ethics. Operates more in the disaster situations where you have urgent crisis and the need to have greater expediency. Key takeaways from this part is you can't plan for a 100-year event, but you can improvise. Your single point of failure may be losing people. Everybody becomes an external customer, and with increased crisis urgency, then we see more expedient decisions, more pragmatic actions taken. What I recommended to the senior managers who were on this call is, join a creative collaboration group, share these best practices. We have 2 of them that are operating fairly actively now in the nonprofit space. Read up on disaster response. Start with Amanda Ripley's book that I showed earlier. Some of the participants had other books to recommend as well. And then experiment and share what works. So this is a broader community than our immediate organizations. This isn't a matter of discovering things that's good for your organization. It's sharing it with the community at large so that it can be also applied and built upon, which is then again, good improvisation, building on what others are doing. I said I would do a slide on this quickly in terms of, we're depending on technology, as Martha, I think, reminded us. And I went back to look, these are all of the technologies on the left-hand side that all the nonprofits are talking about. These are the things that they're using now to operate their organizations in a stay-at-home mode. And many of these, matter of fact, half of these are less than 10 years old. So if this crisis had happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, we would not have the role that technology is playing today in allowing us to collaborate and communicate and remain part of our social groups despite the social distancing and isolation that's been happening. That's it for the lecture. There's a lot to digest in this or take in, but let me pause now and ask what questions you have. I don't see any questions in the chat window. Are there any questions in the Slack channel?
Hello, this is June.
Hi.
I just read an interesting article yesterday regarding the coronavirus related issues in South Korea. And one thing we have to consider when we are facing a crisis like this is also the secondary effect of our first response, I guess. Because in Korea, the test for DUI is done by a breathalyzer. And because you know how breathalyzer can transmit people's spit to other people if used repetitively. So Korea initially completely banned all DUI testing on the public roads, which led to significant increase in DUI driving. So they had to come up with a new test, which is they set up a S-shaped cone in the public road where the driver had to drive through those obstacles, and it was actually found effective. So the lesson I got from that that article was that when we are faced with crisis that causes a lot of disruptions in our life, basically there's more to it than what meets the eye. There are secondary effects to those disruptions. So as a as a people who are studying technology, we should always think about the future, not just what meets the eye, because that's being worked on by a lot of people already. So we should really consider what secondary measures that we can take to, alleviate any future issues.
Yeah, very, very good point, Sujun. And this is, we often refer to these as unintended consequences or second order effects, which you're correct to point out. And these are the types of things that need to feed into the lessons learned in the chart I showed earlier, so that we do make changes and are better prepared for something similar that occurs in the future. We hope and pray that nothing like that happens again, but we're better prepared because one of the sayings that I had in my IT departments was always never waste a mistake. Or never waste a problem. If you can, figure out how you're going to avoid it happening again, or be faster in your response if it happens again, and clear about what changes you're making, then you don't have a problem. You have a learning opportunity. And so, not missing the learning moments that come out of a crisis like this, you're absolutely right, is important for us to do. Other comments, questions?
I just had the thought from that example with the drunk driving, it points to our over-reliance on technology. Why have we had all these breathalyzer tests if 3 traffic cones will solve the same problem?
Right, exactly. Doesn't that reduce the cost of the test, as well? Yeah. Sometimes the low-tech solutions, my favorite story, of course, is the one where there was a task force at a U.S. company that developed a pen that would work in outer space for the astronauts. And it ended up costing, I don't know how many thousands of dollars per pen after they finished this design for a pen that would work. Well, the Russian cosmonauts used a pencil because a pencil works in zero gravity, no matter what angle you're at, right? So I just thought that's a reminder that sometimes the highest tech solution is not the best one. Good point. Other comments? Questions? Okay, I'm going to skip the break because I'm going to go through these next couple of slides quickly, and then we'll stop if your teams then want to meet so that we end early. The second handout is this sample budget template for an IT project. It's multiple pages, so what you see here is just the top half of these. And the question I would ask as you look through this is which of these are one-time costs and which of them are recurring costs? And here's the hint. Where are their year 3 costs? So let's see, if I think I saved a copy. Yeah, I have a copy of it here. So if I bring up my Excel sheet, so if you look through this third column here, you see a lot of zeros, right, for this example. And you keep going down. This is a large spreadsheet, not necessarily, you don't need one that's necessarily this large for your projects. But here, look at the ongoing costs. Those are something that happen after the launch of the project and continue in the future years. So when we look at one-time versus recurring costs, we look at these costs here of what repeat. So there are things like maintenance and service charges. There's internal IT support, which actually, this is usually people that are going to operate or run that. In this case, they've assumed that the existing people are just going to do it. But that may require, your project may require some extra people here to run things or support things going forward. And so you always want to look at your one-time versus recurring. Now, this is a longer template than you need to do for your projects. You need to, maybe yours is only going to be a half a sheet, and that's fine. But this will give you some ideas of some of the line items, and certainly the headings are where you should focus. So what are the network costs? What are the labor costs? Project team costs? Et cetera. And then support costs come in here. Interestingly, those support costs, they don't have continuing in the future, which I sort of raised my eyebrows as to why not. And then you've got these ongoing costs at the bottom. And contingency, remember we talked about using a 10% or 15% contingency in your project estimates? They've got that here in their budget. So this spreadsheet is in the handouts channel in Slack, and it's also on Google Handouts. You can take and pare this down to just the headings and think about, you know, and you don't even have to use all of the headings, but think about then, you know, providing the costs for your project proposal for the senior management team. Questions on this?
Professor, did you think about ways for us to present to senior management team? Are we just gonna use Zoom?
Yes. So this will be
Okay.
Zoom. You know, so you know, just as you would present slides to the senior management team if they were in the room and you were in the room, you know, what you'll do then is when it's your team's turn to present, you'll share your desktop, and you know, one person in your team will do that. And then you'll go through the slides just like Martha went through her slides, or I'm going through mine as well. And if you have a supporting document, like I have this budget template here, you know, if you're sharing screen, you can have these things preloaded, and then you can go back and forth, you know, between them. Oh dear. Okay. Except it didn't go back to where I wanted, but here's what we were looking at. Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's talk about next assignment. So just a quick story here. So I went back to my 10th year college reunion, and I attended a lecture by Professor Jim Mills, who was one of my psych teachers. I was a psych major as an undergraduate. Excuse me. And he had been working on some projects and some research on strategies for coping with stress. Stress, he said, was becoming an increased problem in our society. And you know, even though this lecture was 20 years ago, probably still true today. And he said, you know, the same stress demands can feel radically different if you feel you have some choice. So remembering this lesson that stuck with me over the decades, I thought we would institute these choices for our class. First, every assignment from this point on is an elective, and everybody's eligible to do electives from today forward. The grading table will adjust 15% lower on the threshold, so I'll republish the grade table with those applied. There are no deadlines with the exception of the take-home final and the SMT presentations, since the SMT panel is all reserved that on their calendar for April 16th. Over the next week, send me your plan to achieve the grade you're working toward. So if you have a grade that you've been working hard to get, you know, what combination of assignments and their points are you proposing to do to get there? And that can be tailored to what your own desires and needs are going forward. And then if you need more clarity on assignments or on these options, schedule a one-to-one with me. I expanded the office hours. So I'm doing office hours on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I posted my cell phone number, so send me a text message and we can jump on Hangouts or FaceTime or Skype or whatever you want, and then talk about those things. This hopefully becomes a way that you can get some relief from the stress of what you're facing day to day, having to have moved out of dormitories and made other plans for how in the world are you getting meals and things like that, to having some choices and some flexibilities, which, if my old professor's right, should help us all reduce our stress, and that's what we need to do. practice presentations. So we have practice presentations on the schedule for April 2nd and 9th, and we were going to do a random drawing to see who went on which day. What I'm saying now is because these are going to take place on Zoom, anytime in that window, actually that week of April 2nd and the week of April 9th, so for a 2-week window, you let me know when your team would like to have its practice presentation, and we'll do them and I'll provide feedback. And then what I'll do is I'll share that feedback with the whole class. So rather than have the whole class be there, of course the class would be invited to attend any of them, but you pick a time that's convenient for your team. And this second point is not relevant, so I should have taken that out. And the third point is not relevant either, unless you don't pick a date. I'll come back to you. And then I'm available to review slide decks in advance. SMT panel is on the 16th. We got all 6 teams presenting. There are 4 SMT members on the panel, 2 CEOs, a COO. Actually, no, I've got 2 CEOs, a CIO, and a CFO this time. So I need to change that heading. But these are the 4 people. You can read about their bios on LinkedIn and the class plan SMT panel tab. And it's an interesting group. All these people said, yeah, don't really want to do this again. They were concerned that, you know, were we going to do this? You know, given the changes, especially when they heard the university had closed. And I said, you know, hey, everybody's been working hard on this. You know, I want everybody to get, you know, get their day in the sun, so to speak, and get feedback from the teams, from the panel rather. Final exam is going to be a take-home exam. We'll release it on April 21st. That's due on the 23rd, so that I can get grades in, and whether those grades are A, B, C, or you know, or pass, no record, whatever the university decides, and whether they add a reveal grade option to that, I guess still remains to be seen. But I will let everybody, we'll know where you stand, because you have the grading table and you have the total points in Canvas. And so you'll know where you stand going through the class. And I hope they decide in a way that you can get, you know, credit. If you've done a good job and you've worked hard, you know, I want you to be able to get full credit on this. So that's extra credit electives. We're going to actually add time to these. I think I mentioned on the other slide, we're going to go +7, I think, on most of these. I'm going to stop there. I'll talk about next steps in a minute, but that's a lot of change all at once. What questions or comments or concerns did you have about this?
There are some questions in the chat room, Professor.
Okay, about being, comment about this is helpful. Will we meet for class on the 2nd and the 9th? Yes, we will. There's a mini lecture on both of those days. Can we get a grade estimator like the one we had in crisis informatics? Yes, I need to update that because the grading table is going to have that 15% benefit added to it. But I'll make a note to update grade estimator.
I have a quick question.
Yep, shoot.
So based off the last email from the UMSI dean, it sounded like they were pretty well settled on doing the pass or no report, which does kind of put us at a disadvantage, I feel like, because this is one of the few classes where there's a clear, you know, pathway to an A. It's achievable, but if we don't have a way of like unlocking that grade, I think for any of us that, you know, does go above and beyond to get that A+, we're not going to be able to get that 4.0 on our actual transcript.
And I agree with you that that's a. I raised this as a concern. I said, you know, when people work hard for these grades and it impacts, you know, if they do these projects and extra credits and it's a points-based system and they get the higher grade and that's going to positively impact their GPA, then we need to let students do that. So I don't think the final decisions have been made yet on it. If they are going to go for the pass no record option, which I think is what MIT adopted, and that was one of the models I think that we were all looking at. Then they're talking about the, and I forget the exact term they use for this, but a reveal option, that you have the option as a student to reveal the real grade rather than the pass grade. And and they're saying, but professors shouldn't tell you that in advance. You should make that bet yourself. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. If we're doing it on a points basis, you know where you stand. There's and you should be able to have that option then to reveal that.
Yeah, Thomas said in his email that his recommendation was that we go without unmasking. So I'm not sure if this is kind of a call out to everyone in the class here that if you do care about having that 4.0 in your GPA and it's something that you want to achieve with this class, you might want to reach out to Thomas and let him know, because
that was my number one record. So he asked a number of us on the faculty to write him about this, and I wrote him a one-page memo on this. And number one item on my memo was, are you surveying students to get their input on this? Now they held a town hall meeting, I understand, and they invited people to write into the dean, but that's different than doing an every person Canvas survey. So how this plays out is remains to be seen. I want you all to know I advocated for you all to be able to get the credit you want. There are ways of doing relief of the stress and pressure of school right now. I think some of these things on this slide are ways to do that. And I think, if you then build up the points to get the A or the A plus, you ought to be able to get it. Other questions or concerns on this?
So should we contact Thomas, or will this be figured out like after the fact?
I would definitely write him. Write him a note, each of you, saying that what your preference is, and that if for example, one thing you could say is if they go forward with a pass no record policy for the rest of the semester, you want the unmasking option, should be an option, so that you can get credit for the A or the A plus if you get it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, because the way this class works, you all know from the beginning, is if you target the A or the A plus and you're not there yet on points, you can do one of the extra credit interviews, for example, and get there. Well, why do that extra work, which I hope are good learning opportunities and experiences, if you're not going to get credit for it? So I think saying that you want to get credit for it is really important, and it's going to be much stronger coming from all of you. I mean, I've raised as loud a voice as I can. Some of my colleagues have as well, but you all work hard, even and under tough situations right now. I think my sense is you all want to get credit for what you do.
So Professor Happ, could you please just clarify, like, are there things from this point forward that are still mandatory? It seems like, the presentation is still considered mandatory and the take home is mandatory, but
yeah, so the only two. Nothing else is. But again, what I'm asking you to do is over the next week, do a memo back to me or a spreadsheet, that just basically says, hey, here's what points I have now, here's where I want to get to, and here's what assignments I'm going to elect to do, and where all the electives and all the assignments due from this point on are all electives. So you pick and choose what gets you the total.
By electives, is that the same as extra credit, or are they?
Yes,
two?
I'm sorry. Same as extra credit, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, so there are 10 items in the extra credit list, I don't remember off the top of my head how many other assignments are remaining from this point forward. So let me give you an example. Instead of doing the 3x3 for March, you may decide you want to interview somebody. They're worth the same points, 100 points. That's now your choice. You know, if you don't want to do paper number 2, think about how you're going to get the 400 points otherwise.
And then the same with the final exam.
No, the final exam you have to do.
Okay.
Yeah. Final exam and the S&T presentation are the only 2 requirements. With a deadline, sorry.
So the overall number of points we need for each grade will be reduced by 15%, and we just have to create a plan on how we're going to meet whatever the new threshold we want is.
Correct.
Okay.
And I apologize deeply about paper number 1. I had all of the grading and comments done on that, and was reviewing that, and then this crisis hit, and I said I've got to adjust upward these grades for we used to call them battle points in the organization where I worked, and so I was making those changes, and I apologize that hasn't been posted yet, but I will do that shortly. Any other questions? So please, again, in Slack, the lecture channel, I believe, is the feedback form. So please fill out the rest of that. And then, you know, again, schedule time with me if you need to chat one-on-one. Happy to do that. Next week, though, and a good reason to be in class next week is Peter Teams, who's the CEO and founder of the Innovation in Large Organizations Institute. It's a mouthful, but it's ILO for short. I'll post a question list on that. These are the readings. Does anyone want to do the one-page summary of this?
I can take them. This is Hojun speaking.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Oh, Joan, you've got it. Cool.
Are you allowed to do it more than once?
Yes, but I usually give preference to somebody who hasn't done it before yet, just so they have a shot at it. But then if nobody volunteers, so then you can do it again.
Okay.
That's all we have for today. I'll leave the Zoom channel open if any of you want to. Well, you probably, it's better for you just to get off and get on a project group chat if you'd like to do that. Thank you all for coming and joining this. Thank you for your comments in the chat window and questions. Please make comments in the attendance and feedback form that I sent around. And I hope to see you next week. Don't hesitate to text me and set up a call for any reason. I'm here, happy to chat. Don't care whether it's evening, weekend, weekday. I'm here for you. Okay, with that, I will wish you all well.
Thanks, Ed.
You're welcome. Have a good week. Have a good evening.
You too.
And I will reach out to a few people who have asked for some one-on-ones next. Okay. Good night.
Thanks. Have a good night.